Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter. I am a curator here in the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies. And what we do is once a week, we take a book off the shelf and do just a little show and tell, 30 minutes. If you have been here before, you know the drill. If you are new, it is quite informal. The chat is open. You can ask questions as we go. I'll be watching the chat. Amy Hutchins, who is our manuscripts cataloger, will be watching the chat. And also watching the chat will be our guest host today, Louis Meiselman. Louis is the Judaica cataloging librarian, and today we are looking at this Hebrew manuscript. So I am now going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Louis. These will be my hands, but he's going to be telling us about the book. So Louis, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dot. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Like Dot mentioned, this presentation, this Coffee with a Codex, is a little bit long in the making, but I'm really happy that it worked out in the end. And on the mention of Glasgow, we are going into Northern Europe. Although further into the continent, we are going into Copenhagen in Denmark. Now, Dot, if you could turn to the title page or cover page. Yes.
There we go.
So you could already see and experience a little bit the fine calligraphy in this manuscript just by that big, bold word Tehillim. You see how it is colored, and the method that it was used to create that calligraphy is called cross-hatching, which is very thin parallel lines, usually somewhat diagonal. Um, and that creates a sense of color, but a lighter sense of color than just coloring it in using a mass of ink. It also creates more versatility for something he did in the inside, which is create these blank spaces um, as an adornment and decoration. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I do want to give you some background on Copenhagen, on this scribe, and what he may be doing with this manuscript. Um, those of you who could read Hebrew will notice that it does not say Copenhagen anywhere on this manuscript. The way I know it was written there is because I did some research into the scribe. Um, his formal name, as recorded in the Danish registers, is Marcus Hartig or Hartvig. Hartvig was the name. It was a is a German name usually used for Tzivi. There was another very famous Hartvig Vesely who actually also lived in Copenhagen, um, and he was like a famous literature person and writer and everything like that, who was alive, I believe, a little bit before this scribe, but so this the name wouldn't be surprising unless you see there's a different name on this title page, which is called Hummel. MH is Marcus Hartwig or Hummel. Hummel is the name for a city actually in Belarus, which is today called Gomel. Um, it has to do with the origination of the community in Copenhagen, where a lot of Eastern European families, specifically during the 17th century, they were running away from with the different things that had been going on in Poland, beginning with the 1648 and 1649 massacres, and they moved to Western Europe, and some of them kept surnames having to do with towns and cities from Eastern Europe. And that is what I believe is why in the Hebrew he wrote down his name as Homel. I was able to find other manuscript executions in different collections, including some today in the Jewish community in Copenhagen that he did that, and these suggest that he was actually in some kind of formal or semi-formal position as a scribe in the community this late, which I thought was pretty nice. However, in the title page you see in front of you, he tells you that he's going to write down the book of Psalms, the Tehillim, for the honor of God, which sort of tells me that he's not writing this as a commission for anybody or somebody asking him or paying him to write it down, which otherwise it would suggest because it's very richly presented. It's got his calligraphy. It's very neat. It's got decoration, and this is you can't really see this through the images that we see in front of us, but there's actually a lot of metal inside the inks, gold metal, um, some kind of blue or silver metallic ink that comes through, and when you shine a very bright light on it, which I don't suggest, you can see some of the metal inside the ink, all suggesting that it was like a, a good execution or a finely done execution, I should say.
Yeah, I'm holding it up here because you can kind of see, I think, that this letter is blue. And then there's a
Yes.
couple of other blue ones a little bit later, so you can see that color a little bit.
Brian, I see your question if the metal oxidizes. The answer, I believe, is yes, it does oxidize. These colors, this is me guessing, but I think that these colors were probably more vibrant in 1875 to 1876, and they've gotten less so as they've gotten older, and also the metal you could see has kind of trying to think of the word where you see it's sort of portioned into different parts of the letter. Um, but you know that's I think a sign of aging. But either way, I think that the paper being this late into the 19th century, the paper which you could see is on this lined paper is commercial and it has some acidity to it, and that may have had an effect on the inks as well. Yeah, no, it didn't burn through because the paper is thick enough, and I think that this scribe knew enough about inks and paper to probably, select supplies and write it in a way that would avoid that. He may have written it with a softer nib or a softer pen as well. That's also a possibility. Sometimes with very hard nibs, it can really recess the ink into paper, which could maybe accelerate that a little bit. Anyway, I do want to talk more about what this manuscript is and how long it took him to do this. He begins on that title page below those blue letters by saying that he began this manuscript on the first day of Hanukkah of the year 5636, which would equal December 1875. And about 7 months later, um, at the first day of Selichot, which is the week preceding Rosh Hashanah, because he is Ashkenazi, um, that that's about 7 or 8 months later, and it could be because he was busy, but more likely it was because he was very exacting with this manuscript and did it in a very precise way. Um, what you see below his scribal statement is called a chronogram. Those who know Jewish books and manuscripts have seen many examples of this, where he writes what you see there is a verse from the Psalms, and then you see a circle above each letter to indicate which letter you should use as gematria for the Hebrew date, and that Hebrew date equals 5636. Then that is a verse from Psalm 96, I believe.
And is that this larger writing here?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
with the circles above
With
it.
the little circles above, yeah.
Yes. The reason I point out this chronogram, because chronograms are everywhere in both manuscripts and books, is because one overlooked um, possibly job for either a scribe or in the book world, a compositor or an editor was to actually create creative chronograms for the Hebrew dates based on some Hebrew verse that has to do with what season we're in, or even some kind of thing that's going on in the world, good or bad, and so on, that you see throughout history, usually a little bit older than this, across the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, a very creative use of these chronograms that was one of the this is one of the overlooked jobs of somebody in these positions, was that they would have probably a whole number of chronograms ready to be used for executing things on paper. Now, turning the page, I'll just walk you through this manuscript here. Um, what it does not look like a typical Psalms, but and that is because it is not a typical book of Psalms at all. And this is something kind of pretty much unlike I've ever really seen before. Um, the book of Psalms is less and less is executed less and less into manuscript as it becomes more and more available in print. And by 1875 and 6, it's available everywhere in print. If you're going to put the Book of Psalms into a manuscript, you likely have a special reason to do it. Um, Now, he did it for a special reason. That is, he alphabetized the entire Book of Psalms. If you look up at the right upper right margin, you see an aleph, and that is to say that all the verses that begin with aleph will start here. And he continues that through all the 22 individual letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And at the left margin, you see a chapter and verse. Now, let's say a verse started with Aleph, and then the second letter is a bet. It's an early letter. He did not alphabetize it according to the second and third letter and so
Mm.
on. And I have a theory why he didn't do that, but I'll get into that in a moment. Um, but what by doing this, he doesn't share with us why he did this. It could be to be a curiosity or some kind of calligraphic execution of some kind, which is totally possible. Things like this would be done, but it was less likely that such a curiosity would be executed like this, where you have the entire book of Psalms in alphabetical order like this. Now, as to my theory as to why it was not alphabetized further than the first letter, if those of you who may be familiar with the Book of Psalms know that there's a thing called superscriptions, which is it says where it will say a hymn by David or a song by the sons of Korah, Korah. So the superscriptions would all fall pretty much under the letter Lamed and would be pretty much absurd to to be alphabetized in order, because it would say a song by David, a song by David repeated 5 times or 6 times. That is my theory as to why once he organized them into letters, then it is organized according to the order in the Book of Psalms. So, for example, the first this has been recorded for a long time, but the first verse in the Book of Psalms begins with an aleph, and that's what you see at the top there happens to be the first verse in every Book of Psalms, Ashrei Ha'ish. Um, and but that continues as well, where you have it go from earlier in the book to later in the book within each letter as you continue.
So when we get here, are all of these then from this, is this the book, or the chapter? And so this is all verses from that same chapter?
Yeah,
And these are
yeah,
the
yeah.
chapter
That's like
numbers?
a
Okay,
that's
got
a
it.
ditto sign. I think that's a ditto
Yeah,
sign.
it is a ditto sign. That's what I thought.
So yeah, so they're from the same chapter. Because sometimes you have, especially for a letter like Aleph, you have a lot of verses, and they
Mhm.
can come up from the same chapter as you see. Um, Now, it should be mentioned. I'm not going to get too much into the chapter and verse structure of the Psalms, but the Psalms um does have certain chapters that are alphabetized in their own structure, meaning in every book of Psalms, the verses in that chapter are alphabetized, such as
Mm.
111, 120, 145, and most famously 119, where each letter of the Hebrew alphabet um, is given 7 verses, and excuse me, 8 verses, and that equals 176 verses of the Psalm 119. And that may have spurred our scribe onto this idea of maybe creating the Book of Psalms as Psalm 119. If you think about it that way, I that's sort of where I've landed on as to why this was actually done. Um, like I said, it probably was a curiosity, especially because of the fact that he doesn't mention anybody asking for this manuscript to be executed in any way or to, make a creation for a synagogue, for a family, for a person. Um, and so therefore he clear with the references that he has in his scribal statement, it seems to be that he intends this not to be a sort of secular study manuscript, but more of a sacred Bible manuscript. However, it is also a curiosity where he creates basically, like I mentioned, a Psalm 119 over the course of the entire book of Psalms.
Sorry, the light has gone out, so I need to make sure. There we go. Sorry. There we go. And I've just been turning the pages. There are a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
Brian says, and I think this is interesting, that it almost looks like an accounting book. And I'm curious because this is clearly a blank book that he
Right.
bought at a store. And it does look like it could be for accounting because you've got the longer ones and then the two columns here. I don't suppose you know, or we're just sort of guessing as to what the notebook would have been used for usually.
We are guessing. But like you said, this is a very late manuscript. In the scheme of manuscripts, especially as the ones we talk about on this program. So
Mhm.
I think that it's totally possible. I would say more likely it's a stationer where they would
Ah,
create a kind of commercial blank manuscript for whatever you may need, whether that is accounting, whether let's say you're the captain of a ship and you need to log different things,
mhm.
whether there were still many uses for manuscripts even that late in the 19th century. Um, but he this one happened to be used in I think in a very appealing way, to execute a calligraphic alphabetized version of the Psalms.
Mhm.
Um, and the way he put his chapter and verse citation at the end. So
Yeah.
it's possible, but it does also have decorated end papers, and it appears that
Mhm.
the original binding is still on the manuscript, or at
Yeah.
least contemporary. Um, so that says that it probably is not. I don't know, for the lack of a better word, probably not cheap, but
Mhm.
it does make you wonder, like what was this intended for? I agree.
Yeah. I just paused here. I was just flipping through while you were talking, and I just paused here because we're going up in the alphabet. So we've got a
That's
new
right.
section.
That's right. Now I should mention, there is a field and as well as a subject heading called miscellanea. And so you can do Bible miscellanea. And what I've seen that used for in regards to Hebrew manuscripts would be, let's say somebody has like a handwritten liturgical calendar of the Bible or the Psalms. The Psalms is the probably the most liturgized for I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to use it as a word. The most liturgized book in the Bible. It's all over the liturgy in different orders and everything like that. And there's actually a word for this called psalmody, which is just creating the use of the Psalms as a sort of prayer and meditation tool. And I would say that there is actually less of that kind of evidence with this manuscript than with other examples that we have, and maybe we'll show at a certain future date, because of the fact that it's so taken out of order. The order has taken away the structural meaning of many of these verses. If you're going to read one psalm that comes from David's life in, as he's being chased by King Saul, and then another verse from the Levites writing about something else, it takes away the whole contextual and structural meaning of it to see those together and to just have that as the complete has have that book in completion. So I would say it's less of that, but it's still in the miscellaneous Bible miscellaneous category is what I'm trying to say. I should mention
Um,
also that it's non-academic in the sense that it does not have cantillation. What you see in the letters is vocalization, which which a professional scribe would use for any sacred text, no matter the use of that text. But there's no vocalization. There is no kind of Masoretic notes or anything like that. So there's no evidence of this being used for any kind of academic use or study either.
in the chat, Linda has pointed out in a few places where it looks like there was an error and he scratched it out
It's hard for
here
me to
and
see that spot. You want zooming up on that? I could
yeah,
try to.
let me zoom in. Oh,
Yeah, that's a typo there.
yeah. Yeah. And there was another one on the previous page up here. There it is. Just one letter.
Yes, in that case, let's say, for example, the word Ashir, it looks like it appears that he started writing it with an aleph and then crossed that out and wrote it with an ayin, which is correct.
Yeah.
Um,
So he was fixing things as he went along.
yes, yes. Now, I mean, one thing about this is that you can ask, like, what does it accomplish besides for being, appealing, like visually appealing? I think it does help with a kind of memorization. Um, You do have we do have another type of manuscript called that comes from North Africa that has sort of it is also late like this, and it has either strophes from different psalms, or it has just different selections from rabbinical literature and the Bible. And that was for somebody who had like a professional position to sing Hebrew poetry that he would create using these strains and selections. I don't think that's what this is, but the common denominator between the two may be that this would assist with a kind of memorization. If somebody wanted to have instant recall of every word or every group of three words of the Psalms, this may be one way to do it, is to have an alphabetized like read through of the Psalms taken out of its, biblical and liturgical form, and be able to memorize it that way, from A to Z, so to speak. I see. Yeah, it can be a finding aid, a finding aid of some kind, but the Psalms is so common, between the liturgy, between the Psalms itself, and other uses. It's so common that I don't know if they would require a finding aid for that, like you would have a finding aid for a book like the Mishnah or the Talmud, but it would be more of a memorization tool, which actually you do see people do sometimes memorize the Psalms for one reason or another. That's one reason I've come up with that I think may have been done was just to be able to have some kind of memorization. Um, of the book and to be able to use it off of a solid recall.
Yep. And Arthur is asking, does the absence of cantillation suggest no interest in chanting from this source?
That can be as well, but to my knowledge, the Ashkenazim and many others don't really have a tradition for the reading of the cantillation. By reading, I mean for the chanting of the cantillation. for the what they call the Sifrei Emet, the books of Psalms, Job, and Proverbs, which have an entirely different set of cantillation than they do um, than the rest of the books of the Hebrew Bible. Um, that doesn't mean that some did not have a tradition of chanting them. There were some that did, but overall, it would be hard to say that there would be a tradition of chanting them in a formal cantillation style. And usually, when they are chanted, it's either in a liturgical context, so the liturgy has a liturgical style, or it's in some other sort of more freer context than a formal a formal what do we call in Hebrew te'amim or cantillation, like as you would have in the Torah, the Bible and so on. Um,
So I,
so I yeah.
sorry, where you finish your thought.
I think I finished. I see that there are a whole number of questions waiting. So,
There are questions, but I paused here because it happens that the page is sitting at exactly the right angle that I think you can see this. I've been noticing as I'm turning that that we still have this like alternating blue and sort of shiny black. And it's hard to see in the camera, but right here you can see that the purple, the sort of dark purple are these dark ones, and the black ones are reflecting the light. And so they look lighter right now. So you can sort of see how the different inks are distributed on the page. And that's just really interesting to me that he's switching back and forth between them for some reason. I don't, I just think
ye-
it's interesting to see.
yeah, I did see some of that, although I can't I can't provide you with a comprehensive theory to it until I see the full manuscript digitized, where I could really zoom
Yeah.
in and see what he's doing. There is aging on some of the script, especially on the calligraphic script on the title page. But it could be that he's doing something else with that. I think it's completely possible.
Yeah. Do we have time to answer some more of the questions before we finish up? Or was there more that you had to say about the book?
That was pretty much all I had to say, because once the Psalms end, in this case at the letter Tough, that's the end of the manuscript. So I'm ready for more questions.
Okay, so a few people have asked why these guide letters up here have a dot on them.
Um, it could be it could be that he was using that to center it. If you look, so there's a bounding line. The bounding line is the that margin there. And
Oh.
it could be he used that to center it in those squares. Um, That's what I thought. I don't know this for certain, but I thought that he was doing that to center the letter. Hebrew the this is like a sort of late Ashkenazic square script, and different letters have different weights and sizes, but it's the same size square that he's using on every single page. So that would probably assist him. Again, I think he from other sources, I know that he's a professional scribe, so that would assist him to center it correctly and not to either have it too far on one side or to have it too small or too large. Um, I hope that's a good answer.
All right. There's a question about the scribe. Did he write other manuscripts? I would assume so because his writing is very nice.
Yes,
But do they
yes.
survive?
Yes, they do. There are some well, there's a consortium of Hebrew manuscripts digitized online in a project called Kativ, which is run by the National Library of Israel, and I saw different examples of things he's either written partially or completely. For example, the one of the more common manuscripts to be, to be commissioned is called Perek Shira, which is also kind of a biblical miscellany, but it's too long to describe here. I hope to show something like that at a future time. But there's an example of a Parak Shira he did for a patron, or a client in this case, I think. And there are other examples of his manuscripts that do survive. And he's got this calligraphy in them, as we see in front of us. According to what I saw at the time that I was cataloging it, we have the most of his writing in one item compared to what the others have. We have a whole number of folios here, and the other ones are much smaller in comparison. And those are the ones that have survived and are digitized and identified.
Mhm.
So, who like with everything, who knows how much is out there, but that's what I was able to ascertain at the time that I cataloged this.
Yeah, and Amy has put in a link there in the chat to the National Library of Israel digitized Hebrew manuscripts.
Thank you.
And now we're over time, so we have to say goodbye. Thank you so much, Louis. This was such an interesting manuscript. And thank you, everyone, for coming. And come next week and have a good week. And I'll miss you next week, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. So show up for Nick. He'll appreciate it.
Thank you, Doc, and safe travels.
Thank you.